There is a moment most people know well. You are lying in bed, the room is dark, the house is quiet, and your body is exhausted. You can feel the tiredness in your muscles, behind your eyes, in the weight of your limbs. And yet, something inside you will not stop. Your mind keeps running, replaying conversations, drafting tomorrow's plans, circling back to something you said 3 days ago that probably did not matter, but somehow still does at midnight. You shift positions, you check your phone, you tell yourself to relax, and somehow that makes it worse. Hours pass. Eventually, you drift into something that technically counts as sleep. But when the alarm goes off in the morning, you do not feel restored. You feel like you just survived the night rather than actually rested through it. If that experience sounds familiar, you are not broken. You are not unlucky. And the solution is not to simply try harder to fall asleep. What is actually happening inside your body in those hours is a story about one specific hormone, a biological timing system most people have never been taught about, and the deeply human reasons why modern life quietly keeps that system from doing its job. The hormone is cortisol. Most people call it the stress hormone, which makes it sound like something that only shows up when you are anxious. But cortisol is not simply a stress response. It is a timing hormone. Its primary job is to signal alertness across a 24-hour cycle. In the morning, cortisol rises sharply. That rise pulls you out of sleep. It sharpens your focus and tells your body the day has begun. Throughout the afternoon, cortisol gradually declines. By evening, it should be approaching its lowest point. That drop is the biological trigger that allows your brain to enter its deepest stages of sleep. Here is what no one tells you. Deep sleep is not something your brain does simply because you are tired enough. It is something your brain allows only when it is convinced the environment is safe. When cortisol is still elevated late at night, the brain reads it as something might still be happening, something unresolved, something worth monitoring. And so it keeps part of itself awake. Even when your eyes are closed and your body is still, the brain remains partially on guard. That is what creates the kind of sleep that leaves you feeling unrested even after 7 or 8 hours. The hours happened, but the depth was not there. To understand why cortisol stays elevated into the evening, you have to understand the HPA axis, the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland, and the adrenal glands. These three structures function like a biological threat assessment system. The hypothalamus constantly reads signals from your environment. When it detects potential danger, it triggers the pituitary, which signals the adrenal glands to release cortisol. The problem is that the hypothalamus does not distinguish between a physical threat and a psychological one. It cannot separate being chased from reading a tense email at 11 at night. To the HPA axis, even a hint of unresolved tension reads as a survival signal, and cortisol stays elevated long after you have turned off the lights. Inside the hypothalamus sits a tiny cluster of neurons called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, the master biological clock of the body. It uses light information from your eyes to synchronize the cortisol rhythm with the actual time of day. The evening cortisol decline only happens smoothly when the brain receives consistent signals that darkness has arrived. When light is still present at 10 at night, when the mind is still running problem-solving loops, the suprachiasmatic nucleus gets confused. Cortisol declines slowly. Melatonin rises late. Deep sleep gets compressed and loses its restorative power. Deep sleep occurs during slow-wave sleep. In this stage, the brain produces large, synchronized electrical patterns called delta waves. The glymphatic system, the brain's internal cleaning network, opens up and flushes metabolic waste from brain tissue, including compounds linked to cognitive decline. Growth hormone is released, driving tissue repair. Memory networks consolidate what you learned during the day. The immune system strengthens, but all of this can only happen when the brain disengages from threat monitoring. When cortisol is high, a region called the locus coeruleus stays active, releasing norepinephrine that keeps the brain in low-level arousal. As long as that continues, you cannot fully enter slow-wave sleep. You might be unconscious, but your brain is not deeply resting. This is the mechanism behind sleeping 8 hours and still waking up exhausted. So what keeps cortisol elevated at night? The first is light. The retina has cells sensitive to blue light that send information directly to the suprachiasmatic nucleus. When blue light hits the retina in the evening, the biological clock reads it as daytime. Phones, televisions, computers, all emit concentrated blue wavelengths. Even dim screen exposure in the hour before sleep can meaningfully delay deep sleep. The second is cognitive load. Your prefrontal cortex continues running simulations of unresolved problems even when the rest of you wants to rest. In modern life, almost nothing is ever fully resolved. There is always another message, another task. When the prefrontal cortex senses unresolved load, it signals the hypothalamus to maintain alertness. You feel tired but wired. Your body is exhausted. Your mind refuses to stop. This is not a character flaw. It is your brain doing exactly what it evolved to do, in an environment it was not built for. The most effective strategy for this is cognitive offloading before sleep. When you write down the things your mind is circling, tomorrow's tasks, unresolved worries, thoughts that keep returning, The prefrontal cortex registers that the information has been stored safely. The loop closes. The brain no longer needs to keep the file open. The HPA axis receives less input. Cortisol begins to decline. This is not journaling as a vague wellness habit. It is a specific neurological intervention with a clear biological mechanism. The third factor is temperature. In the hours before sleep, body temperature naturally begins to drop, and that cooling is itself a signal that activates deep sleep. If the body stays too warm, the transition is delayed. A counterintuitive solution is to take a warm shower before bed. The heat causes blood vessels near the skin to dilate. When you step out, that heat radiates away quickly, and core body temperature drops faster than it would have otherwise. The brain reads this as a strong circadian cue and accelerates the cortisol decline. There is also an emotional dimension that is often the most overlooked. When there is unresolved tension in your life, conflict, disconnection, the anxiety of feeling unseen, your amygdala continues processing that tension after the lights go out. The amygdala feeds the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus feeds the HPA axis. Cortisol stays elevated not because of anything physically threatening, but because your brain is still scanning the emotional environment for safety signals it has not found. This is why a brief moment of genuine connection before bed is not an indulgence. It activates the parasympathetic nervous system. The vagus nerve carries signals that slow the heart rate, reduce cortisol, and tell the brain the environment is safe. When the brain receives that signal consistently, it begins to lower its guard. And when its guard lowers, deep sleep becomes accessible. What makes all of this work is not any single habit but the concept of pattern. The circadian system is a learning system. When your brain receives the same sequence of signals every night, darkness, cooling, reduced stimulation, emotional calm, it begins to predict what comes next. It starts lowering cortisol earlier and rising melatonin sooner. Over weeks, the body begins preparing for sleep before you even consciously initiate it. Deep sleep is not something you achieve through willpower. It is something your brain allows when it receives consistent signals that the environment is safe enough to fully rest. The distance between you and the sleep you are looking for is not effort. It is signal. Your brain is listening every single night, asking, is it safe to rest now? When you learn to answer that question through the environment you create, the light you dim, the thoughts you release, the temperature you lower, the emotional ground you find, your brain will respond the way it always wanted to. It will let go. It will go deep. And in the morning, you will notice the difference not just in how you feel, but in how clearly you think and how present you are for the life you are actually living. If this kind of insight resonates with you, the kind that connects what is happening in your body to what is happening in your life, then consider subscribing to Mind Paradox. Every video on this channel is built around one commitment: understanding the hidden systems beneath human behavior so you can live with more awareness, more intention, and more genuine rest.